We might start seeing Bitcoin spot ETF approvals as early as this week, which brings us on to the next big argument that we're seeing across the space. Are the Bitcoin spot ETFs priced in? Let's roll that intro and get right down into it. So hi and welcome back to the channel. This is one of those videos where I grab the camera, get away from the desk and start talking to you guys about what is going on in the crypto space. If you're new here, why not go ahead and subscribe and stay up to date with everything that we do here at Cheeky Crypto. So let's jump right down into this video. So obviously Bitcoin spot ETFs, it's a subject of immense interest for the crypto market, right? We've seen a lot of applications. We even most recently saw just before New Year's a whole flurry of new amendments to the existing applications for Bitcoin spot ETFs. Now I have put together a number of different videos over the last few months talking about my thoughts and opinions on what I think is likely to unfold here with Bitcoin spot ETFs and where I think the price action of Bitcoin and the crypto market is likely to go. Now, the purpose of today's video is, again, an argument, a subject matter, things that have been cropping up over the last 24, 48 hours, both the bulls and the bears fighting and kind of presenting their, data and opinions on what they think the most likely outcome of the Bitcoin spot ETF approvals are likely to be. Whether or not, specifically whether or not, the price action for Bitcoin and the Bitcoin spot ETFs is priced in or not. Now, with Bitcoin moving up the way that it has done, there's been some pretty interesting kind of speculation as to where Bitcoin's price action may be going in the future. We have to consider several different pieces of data before we can really get into kind of being really confident about whether price is likely to drop on the news of a Bitcoin spot ETF approval or whether or not we are going to see price rallying up towards kind of 200 or well 100 $350, $200,000 Bitcoin, right? Lots of crazy price predictions when it comes to BTC. But what about the data, the indicators, and the logic that goes into the bull's argument to the upside, right? And there's a few different things fueling this. In my opinion, it's kind of just wild speculation. There isn't really a lot of facts behind the idea that it is not priced in, but there are a few articles being written and a few things being kind of thrown out there to suggest that, ultimately Bitcoin's price action that's thus far, and the rallies that we've seen in 2023, are just, pretty standard kind of bear market reversals and, the Bitcoin spot ETFs are not priced in. There isn't really a lot of substance behind the argument, which is quite unfortunate. On the flipper side of that though, we do see actually some interesting data points that suggest that actually Bitcoin's price action has indeed been priced in, but the moves to the upside are also something of note where we see really poor performance from some indicators as well. So let's talk about that in a little bit more detail, right? So on the kind of bearish side of the argument, we can see and we can acknowledge that Bitcoin's price action hasn't really been fueled from a significant increase in demand. This would go to the argument of saying that the bulls are probably right, saying that, ultimately the price action is not priced in, right? Because there is an insufficient amount of volume to kind of suggest that an increase in demand has occurred. So again, that gives the idea that maybe a breakout to the upside is likely to occur. I counter this though by taking a look outside of just the volume profiles. Although we have a decrease in volume to the upside, suggesting that ultimately there isn't a lot of appetite for cryptocurrency assets at the moment, we take a bigger look at the bigger macroeconomic climate to justify why the volumes are low. It isn't to say that there isn't an appetite for cryptocurrency, but more of an inability to afford to purchase the cryptocurrency at the current rates in which it is. The moves to the upside have been very good, but they haven't been fueled by the kind of demand element. Instead, what we've seen is a decrease in the supply pushing Bitcoin's price higher, essentially meaning that although price has pushed up and it has indeed been an imbalance in supply and demand, it hasn't been driven from what you'd typically expect of a bullish environment, more demand. Instead, it's being fueled by a decrease of supply available for purchase through exchanges. So coming back to that argument of there's not been a lot of volume, therefore we're going to see more volume when we see an ETF approval, I kind of don't think that's correct. I think that anyone who had the spare capital to kind of throw at the market kind of was doing so in anticipation of Bitcoin spot ETF approvals, meaning that actually there isn't a lot of demand out in the market right now, and I don't think we're going to see any more when things are approved. Which brings us over into the flip of that argument, the bearish side, which would indicate to us that we are likely to see people who were buying really early on in anticipation of the Bitcoin spot approval actually starting to sell off their assets, and it becomes a big sell the news event. More about that later. For the most part here, when it comes to Bitcoin spot ETFs, I think, yeah, the approval is one thing, but the launch of the actual product is something totally different. I would align to the idea that Bitcoin is likely to see a big sell the news event based on the fact that there isn't an appetite. The bigger macroeconomic climate does not support the idea of an increase in demand when this news does break. We're more than likely just going to see those early investors taking their profit. What other indicators are there that support the idea of a sell the news event? Well, there is of course a video that I put together, we'll talk about that in a moment, but there is also the futures, the options as well that we have to consider. Now when we take a look at those, we can see that actually there isn't an appetite to buy into the idea when it comes to the futures options of a bullish environment after, you know, we see a Bitcoin spot ETF approval. If you take a look at this, you can actually see that there's less of an appetite now than there was previously, indicating that people are less likely to think that there's going to be a bullish break to the upside on the back of a Bitcoin spot ETF approval. So kind of, as much as I want to kind of be these big rallies and these big bullish movements to the upside on a Bitcoin spot ETF approval, I think the most probable and the most likely thing that's going to happen here is a big sell the news event, which obviously does bring us into the world of charting, right? When we take a look at the charts, we can see several key indicators that are gearing up for a big drop to the downside. Now, we can argue that, you know, this could happen after the Bitcoin spot ETF approval. It can happen several months down the line. It absolutely can, right? These are no guarantees in this space, right? But for the most part, what we have to acknowledge is there is something brewing for the bears in the background, and it is looking likely to be a very significant drop. Now we have relative strength indexes at really significantly high levels on the weekly and monthly timeframes for BTC. This is not a good sign for Bitcoin. Historically, when price action has been this high for the price action, and specifically on the relative strength index and stochastic relative strength index, we have seen a very significant drop in Bitcoin's price, 30, 40, even in some cases 70, 80%. I'm not suggesting that we're going to drop down to 70, 80% right away, or even suggesting that is something that happens. But I do think we should be open to the idea of a 40, 50% correction for Bitcoin. I would be really happy if we can kind of, you know, correct our relative strength index and our stochastic RSIs with only a 30% drop. But again, no guarantees in this space. Ultimately, if we take a look at where our positioning on the relative strength index versus price action and all that on the weekly, monthly timeframes, things are not looking strong at all. And then of course, guys, there's the big video that I put together the other day. It's well worth checking it out if you haven't done so already. And this particular video, I discuss all the previous sell the news events that happened for Bitcoin, and I think it's well worth checking out. I'll put the video right here, so why not go ahead and check that out.